Okay.
There we go. So Sarah, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I'll let you take the floor, and we'll go from there.
All right. Great to meet everybody. And yeah, I always forget to hit that record button too. I'm Sarah Green. I am currently again serving as department chair of the Department of Chemistry here at Michigan Tech. I'm an environmental chemist. I've worked on numerous things. My background is in chemistry and oceanography. I was a student, got my PhD through the MIT Woods Hole joint program in oceanography in marine chemistry. And Lake Superior is kind of like a marine environment. So I've done some work on Lake Superior over the years. I'm not currently doing that now. In 2013, 2014, I was in the US State Department on a fellowship program called the Jefferson Science Fellowship. And there I worked on environmental programs for environmental issues, let's say, for the Asia Pacific region, of which there are many, and also worked a bit on some climate issues. But I've been involved in climate activities for quite some time before that. And since when I returned, I started teaching a course in climate science and policy here at Michigan Tech, which has been going ever since 2015, when I realized that the Paris Agreement was about to be signed and nobody on campus was talking about it. And I thought, we got to talk about that. And so in we've lost track of time here, all of us here in pandemic land. In 2019, I had, after a couple of years of effort, managed to get Michigan Tech to have observer status at the COP, so at the International Climate Conferences. And those are kind of very non-academic type conferences. They're very different. And you need to have observer status to go. So I got Tech observer status. We're able to bring about 10 students per year. So we took students to Madrid in 2019, and we took students to Glasgow in this last year. And there was no COP in 2020. And in conjunction with doing that, we have formed a network of universities and faculty who have observer status and who collaborate in taking students to COP. So I have a few slides about that, but actually I am willing to talk about absolutely anything, almost anything, since you're a small group and you probably have questions on things that are not on my slides. And please interrupt and tell me what you want to hear about, or maybe tell me now what you want to hear about, and then I can tune around that. Anything before I start? Okay. Well then.
Yeah. I could since you're asking, I'm happy to just suggest something. I mean, I'm sure you had some contact with Rachel with this, but I mean, one, I'm just super interested in what you're up to and what you're doing. Michigan Tech has not, like, they're a newer kind of part of the network, so we just haven't had a lot of contact. So I'm just super excited to hear about anything going on there, because I know a few people, but some of the stuff would be great. And then also, I mean, one of the bigger goals of the network is to find ways to collaborate. So not that this isn't necessarily a question for you to answer, but just something maybe love to hear your thoughts on, like, how, I mean, the whole point of this network is that, we all live on this watershed. We have a shared, ecosystem. Many of us have a shared kind of ideal for the future of a sustainable world. So, where are, like, based on what you're doing, where are the opportunities for us to maybe touch base, or, like, into the future, collaborate more? Yeah. That's what I'd love to hear.
Okay. Yeah, good points. And the Yay network also is trying to collaborate, so that fits in well. So let me share my screen, and I'm just gonna zip through these slides because I'd rather talk than show slides. Really. But let me find where they are. Where did they go here? This looks like the right thing. Okay. Let me turn this into a slideshow thing. Can I do that? No. All right. So this is more about, wait a minute, why is it going by itself? I can need it to go by itself. Let's see if I can keep that under control. So these slides are some that I pulled up for you from a different thing. So it's about taking students to COP and what that's about. So the Gay Network is the youth. Hang on, I've got to move this slide so I can look at you instead of looking off to the distance here. So
Sarah, sorry, right now we can't see, we just see a white rectangle.
you seeing, I'm gonna make it come back again.
Okay.
It's because it went away. It's because I
I
moved
know.
from, when you move it from one screen to another, it doesn't like that. Okay, come back to life here.
Yes, we can, yep, we can see that.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so the Gay Network is got a whole bunch of universities involved in it right now. I don't know why it's running on its own. There's always something, right? I didn't do this before. Yes. Okay. We're a bunch of universities that are collaborating on this. Primarily, it's Michigan Tech and Colorado State are leading it. We have funding from NSF for a couple of years to bring students to COP and to engage in this program. Here's a bunch of them. We have some international universities. Monash is in Australia. La Molina is in Peru, and where is Derby? Derby is in the UK. And we sort of got formed at COP25, and we've taken students now to COP25 and COP26. But we also, okay, do people want to know about climate policy? Because sometimes I say COP and nobody knows what I'm talking about. Anybody want to have see an overview here? Maybe?
A real brief overview, I suppose, might help me. I imagine maybe other people on the call are more equipped, but sure.
Yeah. Here's the 1 second overview or the 1 minute overview of COP. So the international climate policy people is the UNFCCC. So it's the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and it is actually a treaty, and it has been signed by essentially every country in the on the planet. But the treaty doesn't say very much specific. It says we all agree that we want to avoid dangerous climate change, but it doesn't define climate change. You know, it doesn't define what's dangerous, how much is okay. And it's old. It was signed in 1992. And so ever since then, there have been multiple or ongoing, I should say, efforts to define dangerous at some level, but specifically to decide what it is that we are going to do to avoid dangerous interference with climate. So UNFCCC is the overall treaty. And underneath that, things like the Kyoto Convention were agreed upon, but not universally. And most recently in 2015, the Paris Agreement. And the COP is the convention of the parties being everybody who is party to the convention, which is everybody, every country. And that's where the decisions actually get made. So can you guys see my mouse maybe? Yeah.
Yep, we can see it.
So the COP meets annually, and it is supported by the Secretariat, which is all the administrative stuff that can organize a giant conference and keep track of all the paperwork and documents and agreements and such like. It is located in Bonn. And then there are the groups that actually do stuff. And these are two subsidiary bodies, the SBI and the SPASTA. So most of the science and technical stuff is here. And they are the people who decide things. Well, these two bodies together decide things like, if you are going to count your carbon emissions, how do you count them? What is the appropriate mechanism? If there's going to be a market mechanism for exchanging carbon credits, how is it going to be done? Who's going to count it? What are the rules? So they propose the rules to the Conference of the Parties, at this annual meeting, they are approved, basically. The IPCC, which you may have heard of also, IPCC is the intergovernmental panel on climate change. So now I can't say panel this morning. And they are the ones that issue reports on the state of the climate. The most recent one you may have seen just came out a few weeks ago. It's the 3rd volume of the 6th assessment report. And they don't spontaneously decide to do that. They are under the direction of not so much the Conference of the Parties, but of the parties through the Conference of the Parties. So the parties in these UN entities, the parties are in control. Right? So it's kind of like Congress isn't in control. The voters are supposed to be in control. And here the parties, the countries are supposed to be in control. And they direct the IPCC to make these reports. And so not only do they make the big assessment reports, but they make special reports. For example, over the last few years, there's been a special report on ocean and the cryosphere. And there was a special report on 1.5 degrees. Is it feasible? Can we make it? So IPCC is independent in terms of being scientists and science driven. And so they are not supposed to be giving opinions. They're supposed to be independent, and they're also supposed to be independent from influence by the parties other than being directed, we need a study on X. So COP is where the governments decide on these collective actions that are going to be taken. And COP26 was hosted in Glasgow last fall, typically a 2-week meeting. And next year it will be hosted in Egypt. All right. Respond to any questions or comments about that. So who we took to COP26 were a bunch of Yale students, and we have assistance from Yale fellows who we are, at least over the past few years, have been able to pay from our NSF grant, and they help us coordinate everything from like helping be sure the students who are going all have their papers and passports and everything in order, and to organize and join press conferences and presentations that we're actually able to do at COP. And then we want everybody to report back to their home campuses in various ways. So actually, I should probably have had one of the students talk to you instead of me, but you get me for today. The students have given various presentations and written up several things. Let's see, Alexis had something written up in Q&A Today weblog, and Katie Barker is a Colorado student who has a podcast on climate. Yeah, and Shane and Emma have, and who else? Jacob and Katie actually helped organize a recent conference that we had on for recent Yay conference that was just last week. All right, so who do we take? This is the group who came from Michigan Tech. And so you can see they come from a wide range of disciplines, and background. So we've got alumni, several who recently graduated. Bruce Woodry is an alumni from many years ago. Kathleen actually lives in your neck of the woods. She's working on a PhD in energy policy, but she works with the Sioux Band on their energy infrastructure and policy and environmental policy in general. So to go to COP, the UN basically issues each observer, well, let me say diversion here. So we have got the parties that can go to COP, and then any entity who has observer status is also able to attend COP. And so and observers include universities. A bunch of universities have this status, but also includes NGOs and international NGOs and subnational NGOs and all manner. I think there's a few thousand anyway of observers. And each observer gets allocated a certain number of slots. We had this a bit based on the size of the venue, basically. This year, Michigan Tech had 5 badges, slots to go. And those are spread over 2 weeks. So we could have 5 go week 1 and 5 go week 2. The other universities, Colorado State and others, had similar numbers. Most of the public universities, because of the corona restrictions, the universities restricted us from taking undergraduates. And so we only took graduate students this year, but we could presumably take undergraduates. This is what it looks like to be at COP, although these pictures somehow are remarkably not very crowded looking. So there were a lot of people there. This one in the bottom here probably looks like the most what it looked like in the hallways. So this was the venue. They call this thing the Armadillo in Glasgow. And there were all these kinds of temporary buildings out behind here, and then this sort of civic arena kind of a thing where we did some events. And there's kind of 3 simultaneous things that go on there, simultaneous and overlapping, I would say. Up at the top here and down in this big room here, there are negotiation sessions. So the main COP breaks into lots of different pieces that are all working on sections of things. And one of the main things that the general public is not aware of that was going on here is that, sure, the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, and we all agreed that this was a way to address climate change. But the Paris Agreement itself did not have the nitty-gritty rules and regulations of how to do that. And this COP, finally, the last sets of rules were agreed to. And you can dig in, all the UN documents are public. You can dig into them and read the nitty-gritty of what was agreed to. But a lot of it is agreed to in these kind of mind-numbing sessions where every country can send a representative and they can niggle about, how many people should be on the committee that's deciding funding for adaptation, and how are we going to structure the carbon accounting process and all these things. So there's meeting rooms like this all over the place. Observers have some access, but not complete access to those sessions. There are big sessions here where some of it is laying out the overall goals of the process. Some of it is bringing together and summing up what's going on in these smaller sessions. Some of it is voting, although it's more like a consensus agreements on various things. And in these big plenary sessions, there's also time given to youth activists and to statements from various countries and things. Okay, so those are the negotiation things that are going on. The other thing that's going on is shown kind of along the bottom row here, is that there's a essence, you can see in the corner here, it says Japan. So there are these, there's a whole room, huge space full of these pavilions, they call them, where different entities, countries can have them, or NGOs can have them, or consortiums can have them. So European Union has one, the US had a US center. The Nature Conservancy groups up with several nature organizations to do that. And they all have their own programs going on. So they have panels and demonstrations and discussions and all day, every day of all of these things. So in this year, the US Center was extremely active, which was not the case in 2015. You could imagine it was not even, didn't have a US Center in under the previous administration. And so these are where countries are bragging about the progress that they're making cases for their technology or their approaches, and very free-flowing discussions going on there. And there are many presentations going on here. And at least one of our students gave a presentation at the Indigenous, actually Kathleen gave a presentation at the Indigenous Peoples Pavilion for this. And then the other aspect, which is maybe not shown on here, but maybe on the next slide. All right, more pictures, random pictures from COP, is this, I guess this is maybe my fourth of the third things. There's activity that goes on outside COP. So there's demonstrations, there are things pinned on the fence. The land inside the COP fence actually is officially UN territory for the time that the COP is going on. So it's all fenced off, but they do allow demonstrations, certainly outside, at least in the UK. We don't know about what Egypt is going to allow. So there's outside activists, but there's also some action inside that civil society groups can do. And so it was a little bit restricted because of coronavirus, but any NGO can organize a press conference. Anybody can organize a press conference, and some of them are crazy, but many of them are very good, to comment on what's going on or to discuss. So we discussed the Yay network and what we're doing. And we can also organize events in this Climate Action Hub in this case, or side events to promote various activities. And so Yay has been involved in those kinds of things as well. And here we go. Okay, here's some of the things we did. We did some press conferences. This is Kathleen at the Indigenous Peoples Pavilion event talking about Line 5 actually, and Indigenous energy issues. We had a fantastic Climate Action Hub event, and I can dig out the video link to that since you might have trouble finding it, which was a panel led by 4 of our students that had some interaction with the audience. Students, of course, also observed negotiations and networked with delegates and stalked some of them. They could see one of our students actually literally ran smack, like literally into John Kerry, because John Kerry was everywhere at this event. He was charging around from the US Pavilion to the negotiations to everywhere, and he was moving so fast. Just ran right into him. So students spent a lot of time actually observing or listening into events at the US panel. We were able to have them meet with one of the US delegates. So many possible stuff here. Oh, and here's our climate action event, a climate action hub event. So these 2 are Michigan Tech students, Shardul and Alexis, now both graduated, and Maddie and Jacob. And they led this hour-long discussion actually on optimism and student action in higher education. And they had a huge audience for this. This was pretty spectacular. And this was in a room, I don't know if you can see this globe behind here. They they had a huge, this was in that arena that I pointed out earlier. They had this suspended earth from the ceiling there. It was pretty spectacular. If we get there where you can see it better up there. So here's a bunch, a subset of the Yay people who attended this event. Okay, so
Sorry, can I ask a quick question?
yeah.
How much interaction is there between like the Michigan Tech students, for example, and the other students within the Yay network, but from a different campus? Like, are they connecting before COP, at COP, after COP? Like, what's the level of interaction there?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And the answer is all of the above. So we are running right now, Michigan Tech and CSU Colorado State run in the fall a joint course where, since in fact we started Zooming with our course before the pandemic. We were like ahead of the curve. So we run a course where students interact with each other pre-COP, and it's interesting because it's primarily Michigan Tech and CSU, but several of the other campuses have joined on for some or all of our courses. And each university has their own course, their own definition, their own, grading scheme and everything like that. But the courses that want to join in for guest lectures that we have. And ideally, we have students collaborate on joint projects. And so typically, because we have a mix of graduate students and undergraduate students, we've been able to do joint projects. Depending on the timing, some of those could move to the COP actually as part of our pavilion or side event or just like a video presentation. Or we've had a Yay conference in the fall where students can present these projects. Then we're struggling on how to do this exactly, but we did at this COP because there are a lot of students. Of course, we can't take all the students because we have the limited number of badges and there's limited funding for travel. But we tried to set up, and I think we're going to work harder to do this next time. We tried to set up some kind of live from COP video calls or here's what it's like on the ground kind of interactions. And we'll try to do that a bit more next time. Because again, I think there's going to be a limited number of people we can take to Egypt. We have hosted a Yay conference actually just a week ago that included students from CSU classes, current classes, but I didn't have a class that was relevant this term, but also it's also open to anybody to present short posters or presentations. And yeah, and we found that, some students take the class and then they're done. And some students really want to stay engaged as Yay fellows or otherwise. So we're trying to open up more opportunities. We want it to be very much student driven. So we're looking for, first of all, we can add anybody to our newsletter list. We're just starting to generate a regular newsletter. And we encourage students to try to identify projects that are kind of in line with Yay goals of increasing engagement at the Science Policy Network and elevating youth voices, where youth is really, I see our sweet spot as being higher education, because we're not Greta, and there's a large youth activism that's sort of not connected to universities or college level. And so we're looking to be able to tie university research and university scholarship into the climate movement, I guess. Does that help? Kind of rambling.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you so much.
Okay. I can talk here if you like about the outcomes from COP26. Are you,
I think this group probably knows what those are, so.
okay, I'm not gonna ramble on about that then. Okay, so some of the things that are cool to see on the ground is that climate negotiation, that Glasgow climate statement, what do they call it? Glasgow climate, climate, what do they call that? Glasgow climate outcome, had some last minute negotiations. It was put up, it was delayed for a couple of hours at the last minute. And it was primarily over, let me go back to this page. It was primarily about this phase down of coal issue, where it had been written in the draft document to phase out coal. And India came up with an objection. India, on behalf of the G7 countries, came up with an objection and said they didn't want to, they would not agree to phase out coal. And eventually, and they proposed phasing down coal. And there was a great deal of huddle negotiations. This is John Kerry, you can see here. This is Susan Binez, who wrote that paper you may have seen on comma but differentiated on the nitty-gritty of negotiations. So she was in there negotiating for the US. This is the EU guy, this Chinese negotiator. And so in that room at the last minute, they broke up for a break, and then this huddles emerged, and there were back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, trying to see who would not object and how they could come to agreement on that last statement. So what's interesting, this is Alok, the UK leader of the event. So I will stop talking there and we can talk. These are the Nsf Awards. Gillian Bowser is the main Colorado State person. She is tireless. Susie Ho from Monash has been really energetic as well. Leah Dundon in Vanderbilt is working on a project to allow to have a kind of climate leadership certificate through Vanderbilt that Yale students could be engaged with. And Andrew Ramsey has been helpful in all manner of ways. We actually got to see him in Glasgow. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing here. I have slides on many different topics if you would like to hear about them. All right.
Thanks, Sarah. That was really informative. I know I followed some Instagram accounts that were at COP, and so they might, were sharing things, but I hadn't seen something quite like this. So I don't know about the rest of the group, but that was informative. So yeah, we can open for questions. Discussion as we go forward. I know I have some, but I already asked one, so I can let other people ask questions.
I was going to ask, Sarah, like you talked about some of the other opportunities to talk in different fora there, and did any of the 8 participants take part in any sort of parallel sessions to the COP where they're sort of talking and negotiating amongst themselves, and releasing counter releases to what the COP officially did? Do they take part in anything like that?
Yeah, so there is a whole parallel thing that goes on at COP. Some of it sort of what do I want to say, organized, and some of it sort of officially organized and some of it not. So there is a center which I didn't actually get to because it was far away, but some people went to it. There's kind of a publicly accessible venue that people can go to, and it's a lot of usually UK kind of promoting their activities, but lots of other organizations there. And I don't know that any of us got to it because it was really far away. It's supposed to be like promoting climate awareness. And then there's the unofficial one, which involves demonstrations in the streets. We are a little bit careful about allowing our students to participate very much in that because we can't have our students getting arrested. We wouldn't be allowed to go next year. Our universities wouldn't allow it. But there's certainly let me be careful about that because we don't forbid them from participating in demonstrations. They just have to be really careful. So I think some people did go to the march. I went in Madrid. I went to the big climate march led by Greta. And so that's certainly okay. We just don't want students getting arrested. And there are ways to link up with those organizations on the streets. I don't know that any of our students actually did this time. And partially it's because it's so all encompassing. The COP itself goes on from like 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. every night. And there's so much to pay attention to that it's hard to have time to do outside stuff. But yeah. There actually are kind of demonstrations in a way inside COP, but they're very formalized. So you can get permission. You have to get permission and you have to tell them what you're going to do. And you can do things like, putting sticky notes all over the wall or doing for Madrid, I know there was an organization that was doing fossil of the day and highlighting, well, Australia is fossil of the day because of what they did in the negotiations today, or US was fossil of the day. And so there is some stuff allowed within the venue, but it's relatively restricted. Is that what you were getting at?
Yes, it is. I mean, I do hear sort of just about sort of parallel things going on where people will get together and try to sort of mirror what COP is doing, but in their own sort of unofficial venue, and then COP releases a statement, and that they release something based upon upon their sort of talks and negotiations. So I was just wondering if the students were taking part in any sessions like that, whether official or not.
Yeah. So some of our students have connected with the Yungo, and I've left out a whole different layer of organization here. But Yungo is the youth group, the official youth group. So all of the observers are lumped into different categories, and universities are lumped into RINGO, which is research and independent. But any youth organizations that have observer status are lumped under Yungo. And what's important about that is that Yungo and RINGO and the trade union organization and the business organizations actually have a voice restricted, but they have a voice at the table. And so they are allowed in some of those big sessions, they are given 3 minutes to make a statement. And the youth statements have been pretty powerful. So they are allowed in many of the plenary sessions, the opening and some of the others. And they are also sometimes allowed to speak in some of the relevant smaller negotiating sessions, which is where they recognize that's where the power is, because that's where decisions about can there be a Yungo representative on this committee that's going to be making decisions are happening. And so I think the NGOs that they represent will be feeding into those statements. So that's like an official route that they can input.
Thanks, Sarah.
I see a hand up.
I do, yeah. I know Charles also has a question. So Paul, do you want to ask your question? And then Charles will have your question after that.
Sure, thanks. I didn't mean to butt in front of Charles, but I have been listening but not watching completely. Just wondering, I think a lot of people outside sort of feel like the COP26 was a massive failure in all sorts of different ways, with only some very minor little bits of progress. I wonder what the students who attended with you as observers felt, and were they discouraged by things in the results, or did they learn a huge amount and get just excited by being part of it? How did they sort of absorb what happened, or what didn't happen?
Yeah.
Sarah, can I just ask my question too? Because it was very similar to Paul's, and maybe I can just kind of merge them together. So I was going to ask, I guess, a similar question in that, like, I mean, I've been part of some of, not COP specifically, but some of those events before, let's say that. And, I imagine for a student, like beyond what Paul just asked, like just like there's so much kind of insider game politics being played in those spaces. And while I think policy is very important, so much of those spaces, from my experience, but who and do you know the lingo and the language, and can you play, and so many discussions don't even have to do with climate issues, they have to do with a million other things, and people are just using those spaces to engage. So I also wonder for a student, beyond just the kind of maybe feeling discouraged, I do wonder like how you navigate, how you would navigate with all these students there, like just kind of engaging in this very weird space where like a lot of these people are like professional lobbyists, and they're professional, like this is what they do. And a student who comes in many ways, probably very idealistic, like a lot of big ideas. So yeah, how do you navigate that? So I guess one, Paul's question about like the discouraging, and two, just like that really weird space that is kind of, very comfortable to some and totally bizarre and strange to others. So it's an amazing learning experience. That's kind of my question, is like, how do you deal with all of that, all these things students must be going through in their experiences?
So those are both excellent questions, and as you said, they're definitely related. And yeah, the alienness it's not only students who feel alien there, it's anybody. Try explaining to NSF about this conference, and they're like they have no idea. So that's part of actually how the network got established, is because we realized that there were a lot of universities who were observers, who were sending students, and the students were completely lost. Ringo itself actually has a morning meeting every morning of the COP where they point out, here are some of the key things that are happening in the negotiations, and key other things that you could look for. Here are the things that are open to observers, and here are the things that aren't open to observers. And people will also say, oh, and I'm giving a presentation at this pavilion event, of the Indigenous Pavilion or the US Pavilion or whatever. So just having the network allows for a lot more communication and understanding of what's going on. And that's part of what we do in the class, as well as we try to give students some guidance as to what to look for. And for graduate students, I ask them to try to identify one kind of topic that they're going to track, because I want them to write a paper on it. So they'll be looking at loss and damage, or some other aspect, some specific aspect, Indigenous voices or something. And so that helps them focus as well. And then we certainly direct them to resources that are guidance in that. I know it's, as the COPs, and also the other crazy thing about this is that the schedule changes at the last minute, and the schedule for the pavilions and all these other events barely even exists a week before the event. So students are like, I want to make a schedule of what I'm going to do every day, and then the minute they set foot on the ground, it's out the window, because it's impossible to follow those schedules. So we do try to give them a grounding and connect them with students who have gone previous years, and that seems to be a big help. Some of my students are international students, and they have been quite successful. I had a student from Ghana this last year who connected right with the Ghanan delegation and really got in with them, went to somebody's delegate's birthday party. I don't know what he was doing. So, the degree to which you need to supervise students obviously depends on graduate versus undergraduate and levels of maturity. So yeah, it is a fire hose. We do warn them of that. I think having them pre-scheduled to do things like side events or press conferences or the climate action event, which I got to get to the link to that, gives them some level of focus. So they have a thing that they're scheduled to do at a certain time, and they're going to the previous ones to see how press conferences run and how to organize that. There were no booths at this last one, but in Madrid we had a booth, Yay booth, which is kind of like it's a place you could put videos and posters and stand there and talk to people. And so that gives people a place to hang out and to keep their stuff and to engage with other people going by. So, there's no way of avoiding that. It's a massive, like, overwhelming sensory overload sort of event. As to optimism and getting depressed, I think that people who were in COP were more optimistic than people who didn't go. And I think that was, the students got that, I think, from realizing that, yeah, there's some lobbyists there, but actually not very many lobbyists, because you can't be a lobbyist. You have to be, lobbyists can't buy their way into it. You have to be affiliated with an NGO to get in. And I think that the students, being able to talk with delegates, realized that they're really committed. It's a hard process, but hearing the high level representatives from all around the world state their commitments with real feeling. Now, maybe that their countries are not carrying through. It's almost certain that their countries are not carrying through to the degree that we want them to. But the people on the ground who are doing the negotiations really care, and they are really pushing for as far as they can go. And I think the students picked up on that. They were able to talk to delegates. They were able to talk to people at the pavilions. They realized that it's a hugely difficult problem, and that progress is slow and hard and painstaking, but that I think they realize that there are a lot of people, high-level people, who are pulling in the same direction. You don't go there and feel like, oh, it's a bunch of indifferent bureaucrats just sort of doing their job. That's not at all the feeling you get. You see, like, I remember one of the chief people from the EU practically in tears in Madrid, responding to a question from youth in one of the side events. They mean it. They're really passionate, and they're doing the hard work on the ground of making these things move, comma by comma through the documents. It's hard.
Sarah, to follow up on that, do the students, that was really interesting to hear, thank you. But do the students leave having adjusted their opinions about, like, the role of the UN or the role of these sort of intergovernmental efforts compared to maybe other scales of effort, or maybe recognizing the role of each are unique, or I guess, and they all come from different places, of course, but I guess I'm wondering if they leave still seeing value in these UN driven processes as opposed to national or provincial or regional or local or something like that.
That's a good question. I had one student who came to Madrid with us, and right afterwards she said, "Oh, that's way too big. That's too much stuff. I'm going to completely focus my efforts on local and state level stuff." And she's running a company on solar agro. combining solar power panels with agricultural stuff. But then she wanted to come to Glasgow, and she did, and she helped organize that climate action event. And so she hasn't given up on it. Certainly students get a different perspective, and do they give up? I feel like students do recognize the value of it ultimately, and they may not want to participate in it themselves, but at least they understand how some of those international decisions are being driven. And they do also come away with a better understanding of let's say the diplomatic process, but the interests and drivers of different countries and coalitions. So, I mean, we can complain, and the Indian student who came with us this time, Ayush, followed very closely what the Indian government was doing, and he was furious for them to be trying to cut out the phase out coal to phase down coal. But he and other students did end up with an understanding of what's driving that, because it's not just India, it's a lot of other developing countries who are like, and they kept bringing up the historical legacy, which you all know, that who was responsible for this problem, and it wasn't us, so why are we having to pay for it? So I think in many levels people gain a better understanding of that. So whether they want to further engage or not, don't know. We'll have to wait a few years and see what they actually do rather than what they say they're going to do.
That's fair. Thank you. Well, we're just a few minutes before 12:30, folks. So if anyone else has a final question for Sarah, we can do that, or we can end a few minutes early. Charles?
I need to go, but I just wanted to say thank you so much, Sarah. It was really great to hear about all this, and I have lots more ideas, and I can't wait to talk to you more.
Well, call anytime. It's summer now.
Yeah. Well, I want to come visit. That's my big goal in life, is to come to Houghton, Michigan. Houghton, Michigan.
Houghton. Yeah.
I'll never get it right.
Houghton, yeah, come to
When
Houghton.
Americans learn to say Saint Croix, I'll learn to say hotel. Yeah. Okay, bye. See you. Thanks everyone. Good
Bye,
to see
Charles.
you. Hi, Paul. Say hi to Hallie. Bye.
Yeah, I'll jump on too, but Sarah, thanks very much. I had a climate change student this term who was actually a climate activist from Mexico, who was on the street outside COP and doing some of the leading there. And so it's really interesting for me to hear about the experience inside and some of the nuance there. That was really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Say hi to Hele. See you. Yeah, we can call it, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Sarah, thank you so much. I think that was really informative.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you, Sarah.
Thanks. Nice to meet you all.